Welcome, everybody. My name is Melissa Sierra. I'm the Senior Vice President, Group Director here at US International Media, and I'm joined today by Tim Lavelle. He's Director of our SEO side of the business, and Tim and I have been working together for over 9 years at USIM. We have a long-standing relationship in helping our clients really navigate any changes in the media landscape, and today we wanted to talk about the recent Google algorithm update in June and what it really means for your particular business. Tim's going to have a little bit of perspective on how to demystify what's new news, what's kind of stagnant in the business, and what changes are ahead with this update. And hopefully we can kind of help you quell a little bit of fears that might be at play, what you're dealing with internally and what that means for your site. So we'll give you an overview of the 5 things that you need to know, and then we'll go into some deeper topics in and around that. So Tim, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, please. Okay, so let me start with, want to give you guys kind of an overview on things to think about based on the updates that we've seen recently. So first thing that I want to make really sort of crystal clear is there were 2 pretty significant updates made to Google's organic ranking algorithm in June. The first one happened on June 2nd. They call this a core algorithm update. These happen regularly. They've been getting released at a rate of about once a month over the past several months. Google's always making updates to the algorithm, so this is something that happens all the time. They tend to make little updates on at least basically like a daily basis. The big ones used to come about every 4 months, every 6 months, something like that. They've been making a lot of these what we call core updates, or what they call core updates, regularly recently. Core updates are core updates. They tweak signals, they adjust the ranking metrics so that they're weighted slightly differently. They're changing things constantly. That's the thing to think about. The update that I want to talk about today and focus on today is this page experience update. So this was released on June 15th. This is an update that has been anticipated for quite some time. They started talking about this many, many months ago, over a year ago, in fact. They call this, or we're calling this in the industry, the Core Web Vitals update. So if you guys have heard of Core Web Vitals, we're going to go through what they are today. We're going to talk about why it's important. That's really what I want to focus on for the purpose of this presentation. So Core Web Vitals are part of what Google calls page experience. And Google is calling this update, the June 15th update, their page experience update. So want to make clear what factors are included in page experience, because it's not just Core Web Vitals. There are others that we'll discuss. Core Web Vitals are the piece we want to focus on because of the new part. I think that's the piece that people have questions on because a lot of people have never even heard of them before. Now, why does this page experience update matter? The importance here is that it is a pretty significant change to the ranking algorithm, or at least a signal that a significant change is coming. That's the piece that we're doing here. This is kind of like your early warning radar system is blinking, saying something is coming. We need to take this into account. We need to start paying attention to it. Why page experience matters is because it's not just going to have an SEO impact, but it also helps sort of quantify your user experience. So it measures how well your website is doing at generating a first impression with visitors. It's about technical pieces. It's not traditional SEO. We're not talking about keywords and content. We're talking about technical programming type pieces, but it's going to have an impact. So it's really important that we start talking about it. Now, to kind of put things in perspective, how big of an impact has page experience had on rankings? Very, very little. So nobody should be scrambling right now, stopping everything that they're doing, screaming at the programmers to optimize Core Web Vital scores. That's not the message that I want to deliver today. What I want to tell you is we should be thinking about planning how we're going to react to this and coming up with our strategy to optimize against these scores. So that's really the piece that matters for today. And really, like, what should you be doing in response to this update? So if you did see rankings declines or rankings improvements over the past month, the first thing I want to say is it's probably not due to the page experience update. It's probably due to that June 2nd core update, or even to the more recent July core update. So if you're seeing rankings changes, don't assume that it's based on Core Web Vitals. Don't stop everything else that you're doing and start panicking on Core Web Vitals. What we need to do is start thinking about how we're going to react to Core Web Vitals by starting conversations with your development team today. That's really what I want to suggest. Okay, so that's kind of the overview. So anyone who just wanted the high level perspective, that basically covers it.
So Tim, diving a little bit deeper, can you give a little bit more color to what is page experience and what's included, what signals are included within it?
Yeah, absolutely. So page experience, let's look at these signals. Now remember, page experience is maybe a new concept for Google's ranking algorithm. But these are signals that have been around for some time. This is not new stuff. When we think about our websites and how users engage with our websites, I think traditionally brands and webmasters we're all familiar with user experience. We talk about UI, we talk about UX. What we don't think about is this programming stuff that's happening in the background, this technical stuff, because our programmers deal with this, right? It's programming, not marketing. So I think a lot of marketing directors and anyone who's involved in marketing might not be thinking about this, but we need to start having this conversation because these metrics are now being incorporated into Google's ranking algorithm. So to be clear, the new pieces are these Core Web Vitals pieces. It's the three at the top. It's loading, interactivity, and visual stability. We'll go into these in just a minute. But there are other signals that have been around for quite some time, for many years. So page experience also includes mobile friendliness. I think anyone who is paying attention to the website probably already has a mobile friendly website. Safe browsing. This is just the fact that your site does not have things like malware, right? And issues that are going to cause problems for your visitors. Secured Site Protocol, or HTTPS protocol. This has been around for a very long time. Google already incorporated that into the algorithm long ago. And then intrusive interstitials, this is like advertisements that pop up and take over the whole page or try to direct you elsewhere, that kind of stuff. So that also is being incorporated into this page experience signal. So there are a bunch of different factors here. The ones that we really want to focus on today, though, would be the Core Web Vitals, because I think those are the newest, sort of the most mystical, the ones that people probably aren't familiar with yet.
And why is Google focusing on these core vitals, like you had mentioned a little earlier?
Yeah, good question. So the reason why I think Google likes these so much is that it allows them to quantify user experience. If you know, if if Google could do everything they wanted to do, let's say we had a perfect organic ranking algorithm, we would certainly want to take design into account. But how do you measure design? How do you measure UI? How do you measure UX? That is a very complex problem. Whereas these Core Web Vitals, because they are not subjective measurements, they're really, very technical, and they happen instantly, like upon page load. They can be calculated quickly. They can be calculated easily. They're very objective, very technical, and I think that's why Google likes them. They're trying to be as agnostic as possible about design. They don't really want to be judging websites based on creative. And so they're trying to keep the algorithm sort of in its own swim lane, which is deciding, which website belongs at the top of our search results. Well, that's not based on how pretty your website is or, how good it looks. It's based on how quickly it loads, how quickly people can interact with it, how fluid that loading experience is. And they can, because they can quantify those metrics, I think that's why they're relying on them.
Can you talk about what that means for SEO and how we need to optimize against them?
Sorry, I missed the last part of that.
Sure. Can you talk about what that means for SEO and how we need to optimize against them since they are part of that algorithm ranking?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to think about this. When we think about SEO, traditionally, it's always been about a couple important factors, right? Links, that's where we started. Then we started talking about keyword targeting. We talk about tags. We talk about content. So these are all the pieces of the traditional SEO process. We perform keyword research to figure out what keywords we want to target. We create new pages of our site. We optimize those pages, tags, and content elements. We build links to those pages. That's what SEO has been for a very long time, right? For 20 years, essentially. Now, we have moved around the importance of those different pieces of the process. We've added and layered in other things. That's not all that we do as SEOs. But technical SEO it's been around, but it's always been this thing that people kind of want to ignore. One of the reasons why we don't pay so close attention to technical SEO is that it's not been a really important ranking signal. When Google makes a move like this and says, okay, page experience is now part of our algorithm, you guys need to be paying attention to this. They're very clearly signaling that this is the direction that they're headed. So we've seen them incorporate things like page load speeds, mobile friendliness, HTTPS. Now that they're talking about these pieces too, we know that they're trying to come up with where is our algorithm going. And as, let's say, responsible SEOs, knowing that this process takes time to develop results, thinking about long term what's best for our websites and where the algorithm is headed, we've got to start thinking about these new factors. New, right? I shouldn't say new because they've been around for a while, but they really are newish, new to Google's algorithm, we could say, new to a lot of marketers, not necessarily new to your programmers, right? So that is where there's been a big disconnect. Is we're now having to think more about technical and about programming elements than we ever had in the past.
Can you talk a little bit more then about the update that you had mentioned earlier, the timing of it, and why it differs from some of the shorter timeframes that usually the algorithm updates play within?
Yeah, so this was really interesting too. When Google rolls out these core updates, or really any updates that they roll out, the regular sort of daily updates, they tend to happen really quickly. The rankings are adjusted immediately, essentially. When they roll out a core update, one of the bigger updates, they tend to give them, they'll say, okay, we're starting to roll out today, and it could take something like 2 weeks for the rollout to complete. In this case, with the page experience update, this is one of the longest rollouts that I've ever seen. They started in the middle of June and they said it will end by the end of August. So they're saying it's going to take us 2 months to roll out this update. That is definitely not normal. That sends kind of some mixed signals. What I think it indicates, the number one thing is I don't know that Google is super confident about this ranking signal giving good results right away. So what I mean by that is I think that there could have been sort of dissension in the ranks at Google when deciding how do we roll this out? How important should it be? What's it really going to look like? How's it going to impact our results? Will it provide better results for users? Another variable that I think goes into coming up with that conclusion is that this update has been pushed back multiple times. So it was originally supposed to go live in May. Obviously, it did not. Like I said, Google's been talking about it for a long time. The fact that they had to delay it, and then the fact that it's taking so long to actually complete its rollout, tells me that, number one, it is very complicated because it's very different from what they've been including in the ranking algorithm traditionally. It's not just tags and content. Number two, maybe they got delayed because of COVID. It's hard to say. There could have been programming delays, something like that. I mean, we all know how those go. We all know how that's gone over the past year, especially. Could have been that. But it also could be that they're not sure that it's really going to work the way that they want it to work. Now, anytime that Google rolls out an update, they're going to do a lot of testing. But tests can show mixed results. And we have seen times in the past where Google releases an update and then sort of walks things back after the fact. I think because this one is so different, because it's really so different from what they've done in the past, they're giving themselves a big window there. They're saying, like, we've tested this internally. We're going to roll it out. We're going to really pay close attention to it. We're going to give ourselves 2.5 months to figure out how we want to tweak it, what we need to adjust. Should we change the weightings? What should we really do with it? I feel like they're sort of covering themselves and giving themselves time to make sure that it's doing what they want it to be doing before they say, okay, it's done. Everybody go out there, take a look at your rankings and respond accordingly. And to be clear, this is not necessarily something that Google typically does. They usually roll out an update and say, good luck, have at it. If you have any questions, go look at our blog post that we wrote years ago that says, provide a good user experience, write high quality content. You guys should know what you're doing by this point. So very different experience. I think they're a little bit sort of unconfident about what's going to happen as a result, but we'll see.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of marketers aren't feeling an impact today so much, but what do you see in the short term and then the long term?
Yeah, so let me pull up. I want to show a slide here that this actually shows what we call the volatility of the search engine results pages. So there are a bunch of different tools that we use as SEOs to measure how much the search engine results pages are changing, and it's basically looked at on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. What you see here is the spikes are times where there was a lot of changes in the rankings. And the spikes are always going to align to times when Google deploys updates. So all of these are going to show, you'll see big spikes, big changes are happening around the core algorithm updates that I mentioned. Early June, and then just recently the one in early July. We see spikes in activity on those times because those core updates had a big impact. If you look at the middle of the month on any of these charts, that June 15th to June 17th time period, that's when Google officially said, okay, we're rolling out the page experience update. Here it comes. We don't see any kind of bump at all, basically. So it's had a very small, very minor impact. All the websites that I'm monitoring, all the websites that we have access to, we probably have access to 200 different websites in Google Analytics. We see almost nothing. We see almost no rankings changes, no major traffic changes as a direct result of the Core Web Vitals update. That's the short-term perspective. So right now, very little impact. Where is this thing going, though? That's why I want to have this discussion. That's why we've been talking about this, producing briefs, and really bringing it up with everybody. I think that this is going to be a significant ranking factor in the months and years ahead. It's very difficult to predict where Google is going, when they're going to make significant changes, and how big those changes will be. But I just have to imagine, based on 15 years that I've been looking at Google's ranking algorithm, thinking about where they're headed, thinking about how websites and how the field of SEO has really matured. Everybody understands that we've got to have links. Everybody understands we've got to create content. We all know how to do keyword research, how to write optimized title tags, how to produce high quality text. Okay, so if we're all doing that, let's say that everybody on the web does that, how is Google going to separate what site belongs at the top from what site belongs in position 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10? I think these technical factors, in my opinion, this is a relatively easy place for them to help resort the search results. So assuming, again, like I said earlier, I think that Google wants to stay out of that sort of qualitative measurement because they don't want to have to deal with creative. They need their algorithm to be done, programmatically, which means at the end of the day, ones and zeros. It's got to be numerical. It's got to be quantitative, not only qualitative. And these technical factors are an easy way for them to get there. So I think that they're going to use page experience. They're going to use things like the Core Web Vitals as the metrics that sort of separate the sites that are at the very top of the results, the sites that already have done everything that we talk about in terms of traditional SEO. If we've already got a great title tag, a really engaging, compelling meta description tag, our headers are optimized. We've got 2,000 words of content on this page. We've deployed keywords throughout that text. Maybe we have 5, 10 different pages all talking about the same subject. We've got all these, our content hubs or our content wheels created. Well, then how does Google decide who goes in position 1, 2, 3? In the old days, it was based on links, right? But we all know that you can literally go out overnight and build 1 million links. There's lots of ways to create links. Google has had to reduce the ranking factor that links plays because it was allowing spam sites to get to the top of the results. I think this is the next place that they can go. They can say, okay, anyone can build a great website. Anybody can write good high quality content, right? It takes time. It's not easy. But once all of you have done that, how do we separate the winners from position 2? Who knows how to do these technical factors? This is something that organizations have to be involved in. A guy with a blog might not be able to score perfectly on site speed and on these Core Web Vitals metrics. And we all know that Google loves brands. They want brands at the top of the search results. So it's another factor. It's another sort of element that they can add in here. I think that allows them to keep the algorithm subjective, keep it numerical, keep it quantitative, and put the best sites that are providing the best user experience at the top of the search results. So I think, let's say 6 months from now, we will probably be having a slightly different conversation about this. I'll be saying, yeah, it's probably having an impact. A year from now, we'll be saying, something a little bit further, maybe 2 years, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. This could be, if you don't have core Web vital scores in the 90s, or let's say the 80s, let's say, you might not be able to get to Google's first page. That it could become just like HTTPS has, it's very difficult to get a site that is not using secured site protocol to Google's first page, and especially at the top of it. We could be saying the same thing in 5 years about Core Web Vitals.
So as part of the home for these marketers to get started, how can they check their core Web Vital scores?
Yeah, so there's several different ways to look at your core Web vitals metrics. And I think I would suggest there's really 3 primary ways to look at it. And depending on who you are and what you do, you're going to want to do it in a different way. So there is the Search Console report. Now, everybody should be familiar, hopefully, at least heard of Google Search Console. This is if you're thinking Webmaster Tools, if you've heard Webmaster Tools, this is the new version of that. It's been around for a while, but this is where we do SEO administrative type stuff. And if you're an actual SEO, or if you're a programmer thinking about SEO, you're going to want to look at the Search Console scores because they're going to give you some information that is really important that you got to react to. If you are just trying to figure out, like, okay, what are the core vitals? I just need a high-level overview of them. I want to see how my site scores. Just give me the quick overview down and dirty. Then you want to go into Google's PageSpeed Insights tool. So this is a screenshot from PageSpeed Insights. I'm not picking on CNN. I just always use them as an example. Pretty typical. They have a terrible score here. And I'll go through what these scores are in just a minute. But if you just want the overview, you're just trying to say, okay, I want to have a conversation with my programmers, with my developers. I need to bring this up. Where do I go? Go to Google's PageSpeed Insights tool. If you just Google that phrase, you'll find a link to it. Put your website in, and you're going to get your scores. So you get a mobile score, you'll get a desktop score, and we'll break down exactly what this looks like in just a minute. But this is the place where you're going to want to go. And then if you're a developer and you're actually like trying to make these updates and optimize the site for Core Web Vitals, you're probably going to want to look at what's called Chrome's User Experience Report. So again, you can Google for that. We'll send it out. We'll send out a brief that has its details in it and the links to it. That gets really technical, really programmy. Don't want to even discuss it. It's sort of outside my wheelhouse too.
Okay. Can you go into a little bit more depth then about the things to consider when you're looking and evaluating this tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to stick with this PageSpeed Insights screenshot. And what I want to point out, again, there is going to be a score for desktop and a score for mobile. So one thing to think about when we're considering just SEO in general, but especially if we're looking at this user experience update and our Core Web Vitals scores, you really need to consider both desktop and mobile. So think about, who is your audience? Are they on desktop devices or are they on mobile devices? And this is different for every brand. A lot of brands, a lot of websites, a lot of products and services and verticals are going to have about a 50-50 split. Some are going to have a very significant percentage of their traffic still on desktop devices. And others are going to have almost all of their traffic coming from mobile. It just depends on what you sell or what you're offering, or basically who your audience is and how they access your material. So you need to pay attention to both sides. If you're going to do one or the other and you sort of have to choose between one or the other, then focus on wherever your traffic is coming from. So if you're a desktop brand, optimize your desktop speed and your desktop Core Web Vital metrics first. Obviously, you want to prioritize the one that is generating your traffic, your leads, and your conversions. Okay, so focus on that first. But then within that, so the score at the top, this 15, this is like an overall page speed score. So it's taking into account all sorts of different elements that go into how quickly your website loads And these Core Web Vital scores, these little the 4 colored scores at the bottom here, 3 of which are Core Web Vitals. I'll get to that in a second. Those are part of the page speed score. Okay, so page speed score is important. This is something that we know is impacting SEO results and especially mobile results. So we should already be, have had conversations about page speed with our development teams. If we haven't, we certainly need to start there. But when we think of Core Web Vitals, it's these three of these metrics at the bottom. So first, contentful paint, FCP, that is not technically a Core Web Vital. Okay, so that's the first thing to think about. What that refers to, though, you can think of it almost like a time to first byte or a first load. So this is the time that it takes for something to appear on a user's device, whether it's mobile or desktop, when they go to your website. It's the first piece of content that appears on their site. How long, or from your site, how long does that take to appear? That's what this is measuring. Again, it's not a Core Web Vital. It's still important because it influences the page speed score, but not a Core Web Vital. Largest contentful paint is where the Core Web Vital starts, this LCP. What that means is how long does it take for the biggest piece of content on your site, on your page to load? So think of this as like your actual text, right? Every page on the web is going to have a bunch of images, some background stuff, some design elements, and then some text that people are actually looking at to decide, okay, what do I do with this? I'm trying to get information. I'm trying to make a decision. The actual content, the biggest, most important part of that content is going to be the text on your page. And that's what LCP is measuring. This is saying, how long does it take for that to appear on the user's device when they come to our website? Okay, super, super important. Basically, think of it this way. If it takes too long for your content to show up, what's a user going to do? They're going to hit the back button, they're going to go back to Google, and they're going to look at someone else's website. They might never even come back because they know that website loads slowly. Okay, that's why this is so important for user experience, and that's why Google's taking into account when they're thinking about who they want to show at the top of the search results. Then we have first input delay, FID. This is about engagement, or responsiveness. So this is measuring how long it takes your site to react when someone loads it and tries to do something. So think about how long it takes. Let's say someone comes to your website and they try to scroll, or they try to click on something. They're trying to do something and interact with your website in some way. That's what first input delay is measuring. And again, if they try to scroll, but they're not able to get your website to respond, if they try to click like a play button on a video or click on a link, and your site is just sitting there not doing anything, then of course you're giving that user a bad experience, right? That's a really bad first impression to have. Our website loads, not only, let's say our website loads slowly or it loads quickly, but you can't do anything with it. You got to sit there and wait for it to react. Not a good sign that you're providing a good user experience. So again, important to your user experience, important to Google as well. And then we get to cumulative layout shift. Now, this one is going to have a much bigger impact typically on mobile devices. What we're measuring here is, you can think about it like design fluidity. So as your website is loading, does its appearance change significantly from what the user sees at first load to the finish of the load? And since we're all using mobile responsive designs and we all have these mobile friendly websites, what you want to make sure is happening is that whatever the user sees at the beginning of the load, things are still in about the same spot when your site finishes loading. The concept here is that if, like, let's say that there's a play button for a video, and the user, as your site's trying to load, tries to click the play button, but that play button shifts and all of a sudden it's not even on the screen anymore when the site finishes loading, Google thinks that's a disruptive user experience. Now, I do too. I think everybody would agree it's not the best way to design the site. And the concept that they're trying to measure is, what does the user see at first page load, and then how does that look, and how similar is the design when the site finishes loading. And again, it's like having a fluid loading process so that we're getting what we expect to happen from start to finish of that load process. So again, what we're trying to measure here and why Google cares about this is, I think that you can think of these like your first impression with visitors to your site. Just like we say that your site's title tag and meta description tag and its H1 tag and its first sentence of text on each page is your first impression. Those are your first impressions from a tags and content perspective. These are your first impressions from a technical programming perspective. They are how quickly does your site load, how quickly does your site react, and how fluid is that loading process so that users get what they're expecting based on what they first see when they try to visit the site. So really, really important. Again, not having a major impact on rankings right now, but the fact that these are the first thing you see in Google's PageSpeed Insights tool, the fact that Google has created an entire section for Core Web Vitals inside of Search Console, the fact that they, had a lot of fanfare around this algorithmic update saying, hey, it's coming, get ready for it. We want you guys to pay attention to this. These are all red flags. These are all things that say we need to be aware of this and we need to start thinking about it and start optimizing against it at some point in the near future. So sorry, I know that's a sort of a long explanation, a long answer, but hopefully that's clear at least.
I think it laid a great foundation of where to get started. I guess the other question, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but if one of these marketers started to see their rankings decline in June or July, you were mentioning that possibly it might be a different update that had occurred. Is that right?
Yeah. So really, really important thing to think about. So, rankings are always changing. That's the first thing that we should talk about. There's a concept in SEO that we refer to all the time, and clients on the call, you guys have all heard this before. SERP churn, right? CHURN. That's the concept that the rankings are always slightly adjusting on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And we've literally seen rankings. Rankings can change from day to day. They can change within the same day. They're always going to adjust slightly. When we see big rankings fluctuations, that tends to be tied to a major update by Google, right? An algorithm update. These core algorithm updates, they typically are the updates that have the biggest rankings impact. So, like I said, if you saw big rankings changes over the past month, it's almost certainly not the result of Core Web Vitals. Um, Even if you made significant adjustments to your Core Web Vitals over the past month, or even the past 6 months, let's say that you've really improved your scores significantly. It might not be having a big impact on rankings yet. What probably caused those rankings changes, whether they be increases or declines, would be those core algorithm updates. And when we think about the core updates, something to point out too, in the old days, when Google would release a core update, they almost always would like give it a name. So people who've been doing this for a while, you guys probably remember the penguin update, the panda update. It used to always be animals. The hummingbird update in the really early era, let's say like 2005 to 2010. Sometimes they had really weird updates. There was a Vince update. There was a Florida update, right? And they would just get tacked on by the community, and sometimes Google would run with them. They thought it was kind of fun. And so you'd have these weird names. The new sort of modern SEO era, we don't tend to see that stuff so much anymore. They'll basically just say, okay, here comes an update. It's going to be the July core update. And in the old days, Google would also be a little bit more transparent about what those updates referred to. So we all knew, for example, like the Panda update was about low quality content. The Penguin update was about link spam, basically. These modern updates, these July update, June update, they don't tell us a whole lot about what they're focusing on. And it's become a lot harder also to measure what those updates really rely on, what actually was changed with them, because Google is making them so much more often than they used to, right? We know that they're doing minor incremental updates literally every day. Something is getting changed in organic ranking algorithm. These core updates, like I said, they've been happening monthly recently. That's not how Google used to do this. What that also tells us, though, they're not making huge structural updates like they did in the past. The structural update happens when they do something like this page experience update, this Core Web Vitals update. They talk about it for a whole year leading into when it gets released. There's all sorts of conversation in sort of the SEO world about the update well before it gets released. And everybody knows that it's coming, and we have an idea of what's being changed or what's being altered. Now, in this case, it didn't have a big impact. That doesn't mean that, that it won't have a big impact down the line. But again, if you saw any significant changes in your rankings over the past month, it probably was not this. Probably was one of the core updates. A lot of sites won't feel anything when a core update gets released. So that's another thing to think about too. If your rankings are just stable, you're not seeing any changes, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It sort of depends on what you've been doing too. So if you've been actively optimizing your site, then you probably see at least a little bit of a rankings adjustment, a little bit of a boost in these June, July core updates, just because you've been doing the right thing, right? If you've been producing new content, you've been deploying new content, targeting more keyword phrases, you've been doing the SEO process, then each core update should give you at least a little bit of a lift. That's what we expect to see through core updates. We really don't anticipate most of the time to see major rankings changes, even when a core update gets released, because we know that we're making those incremental adjustments. We expect SEO progress to be relatively slow. We see incremental changes on a month-over-month basis, which should lead to exponential improvements on a year-over-year basis. That's really what we anticipate with SEO. So yeah, if you saw big changes, don't blame it on Core Web Vitals. Start looking at other things. I would say, it's the same stuff that we've been talking about for ages and ages. Look at your content, look at your pages, look at your tags, look at your keywords, all the stuff that's worked with traditional SEO. That all still applies. It's still very, very important. And especially if you're in a competitive vertical where your competition is actively optimizing. Okay, so if other sites are doing a better job than you are, then yes, you're going to see rankings declines when these core updates get released. That's a really important thing to keep in mind.
And I think that's a great way to bring this all together, Tim, is that, SEO is a constant living, breathing organism and lifeblood to a business. And that's really where people's focus should be on now. Would you agree?
Yeah, the way that I like to, my sort of like tagline for that, I like to say SEO is a program, not a project. And what I mean by that is it's an ongoing thing. You don't start SEO and then say like, okay, we got where we want to rank. We're done, right? If you treat it that way, if you treat it like, let's say, like a book, right? If you just publish a website and then you never touch it again, you might get to the top of the results today, but you're not gonna retain those rankings because, like I said, the competition is fierce. There's only 10 spots on Google's first page. There's only one spot at the top of the results. And I can pretty much guarantee anyone who is listening to this webinar, you are working on products and services that are, compelling enough that there is going to be competition for them. Somebody is out there actively optimizing against them. If you're not doing it, you're not going to retain those rankings at the top of the results, even if you've got them today.
All right, so we have some time left for Q&A. I'll open up the mics for any of the attendees. Or you can also drop some questions in on the chat and we will open up the floor to anyone who has a question for Tim.
Don't be shy, guys.
I think it was heavy, Tim, for a Tuesday.
Okay, well, why don't I talk about, let me just kind of conclude here. If people are still thinking of questions, let's talk about what we think SEO strategy should look like in what we call the modern era. Okay, so this is, any clients, you guys are really familiar with this stuff. This is what we do on a day-to-day basis. But if you're wondering how to win at SEO, these are the pieces that are most important for the process. Now, keep in mind, Google's organic ranking algorithm has about 200 factors in it. All right. And not all of them are as important than others, right? Some factors are more important than others. The ones that really matter, I would say you've got to focus on these. If you can get these 5 pieces correct, you're going to have SEO success. I mean, the better that you can do these 5 things, the better your results will be, especially. So number 1, I like to say, you got to pick the right keywords. And other marketing strategies, other marketing channels, and digital marketing especially, has all sorts of ways to target your ads or your content, right? You can use demographic targets, you can use behavioral targets. We don't have access to any of that stuff on the SEO side. We're really limited in how we can target SEO content that we're developing to users. The only way that we can do it is by picking the right keywords, right? Because Google, someone goes to Google, they type a keyword phrase in, and our job as SEOs is to make sure that our website shows up in response to that search. Well, if we don't know what searches are being conducted and how popular those keywords are and how valuable each of those different keywords phrases might be, then what are we even doing, right? We're optimizing a site, but we don't have any idea what we're optimizing against. We're not doing it strategically. So the place to start with SEO is really performing really high quality keyword research, spending time to figure out what your audience is searching for, which keywords you want to prioritize, and then designing an SEO strategy based on that keyword targeting priority. Okay, so that's where we start. The next thing that we need to do is we can't just have like 5 pages on our website. We've got to build a unique piece of content. It could be a page of the site, a blog post, an FAQ, an article, whatever it is that you're developing. You need an individual piece of content, HTML content that has a title tag, has a URL, has text on it to target each one of those keyword phrases that you want to rank on. So this is super critical. It's something that we've been doing since time out of mind in SEO. If you don't have unique pages to target unique keywords, you're really not going to get anywhere. And then the next thing is you can't just create pages because everybody has pages. What you have to do is you got to develop pages that are featuring really what we call high quality content. So this phrase has been around for forever. Content is king. I've been saying it for at least 15 years. Content will remain king is what we should be saying now for as long as search engines exist, right? Because people go to Google, they're typically asking a question or they're looking for information, and the thing that Google presents to them is content. So you've got to have an answer to the question. You've got to have information about the product, information about the service, or whatever it is whatever that keyword might be that you're targeting. You've got to develop high quality content that actually provides a value to the user that searched that query on Google. So we talk about this in the form of EAT style content. And what that means, it means content that demonstrates expertise, authority, and trust. All right, and this goes back to this is a concept that Google developed. If you just go to Google and type in EAT style content, you'll find all sorts of resources about it. The concept really means you have the most useful, most informative, most comprehensive content on the web for whatever topic it is that you're building. Okay, so this is why we're always suggesting create long form content. You want 500 words of text on each page. 1,000 words, 2,000 words is even better, especially for really competitive verticals, really competitive terms. And then in the old days, we could just build, a couple pages or 1 page of content on any keyword phrase. Maybe we have a 15-page website and we're crushing it. It doesn't work anymore because everybody's already done that. So now what we talk about is building what we call content hubs. And what that means is on any given topic, you want multiple pieces of content demonstrating your expertise, your authority, and your trust on that topic. Okay. So while each page is going to target a different keyword phrase, you want to have entire sections targeting each keyword, not pages. So think sections, think content hubs, think content wheels. Again, these are terms SEOs use all the time. If you search them on Google, you'll find all sorts of information about it. If you have questions about it, feel free to ask us. We're happy to provide more details on that. But what you're trying to do with these sections is demonstrate your expertise, your authority. You're trying to prove to Google, not necessarily to users. Remember, we're trying to convince Google to put us at the top of their search results. I want to convince Google that I'm the thought leader in this vertical. Well, it's going to take more than 1 page of content, especially if we're talking about something that's really complex. Especially if we're talking about something that is really, has a lot of details involved. And so really critical that you're looking at that. A good place to go, just to throw this out there, for content inspiration is look at Google's people also ask results. So if you want to target a keyword phrase, type it into Google. Look at their people also ask section. You'll see all sorts of questions that people are asking about that topic and that Google is suggesting you should be answering if you want to rank on that keyword phrase. Really, really powerful way to come up with content inspiration. And then finally, Melissa alluded to this earlier, you've got to be updating your website regularly. So in the old days, we could publish sites, let them sit, and they would still continue to rank and rank quite well. In the modern era, you've got to be really releasing content at least on a monthly basis. So and that's not just press releases and hiring announcements and that kind of stuff. If you want to win at SEO, you need to be talking about your vertical. You need to be demonstrating your expertise. You need to be convincing Google that they should trust you, that you're not only an attentive webmaster, that you're doing these things like paying attention to the core web vitals, trying to speed up your site, trying to clean up, broken links, that kind of stuff, the technical pieces, but also that you're sort of keeping up with what's happening in the space, that you're following along with the news, you're giving people helpful content that they can use to help better understand your products, your services, your company, your organization, whatever it is that you're trying to provide to people. You need to be constantly releasing new content. And that's why it's so important that we are publishing new optimized content on a regular basis. That's why we use what we call SEO-driven blogging as one of our most important strategies sort of in the modern era. If you get these 5 pieces right, even if you're doing it yourself, you don't necessarily have someone, like me guiding the strategy, you'll see at least some performance improvements. You might even be able to get to Google's first page. You might be able to generate some traffic. If you power this with a professional SEO who's directing the whole process and who has the experience, knows how to do it, that's where you're going to see those exponential performance gains. You got to give them their time. That's one thing that I always try to point out too. Don't think that an SEO is not doing their job or not being effective if you only give them 3 months, maybe even 6 months, just depends. But you got to give them their time. If you give an SEO enough time and they're following this process and you're doing it correctly, pretty much can guarantee that you will see results eventually. So those are things to think about. I think that will be helpful, kind of putting this update in perspective again. Core Web Vitals, they're important. They're not necessarily drop everything that you're doing. Keep doing these pieces of the SEO process. Layer Core Web Vitals in as a long-term goal and long-term objective. Keep the marketing team focused on these pieces and get your programmers, your technical people looking at Core Web Vitals and user experience, and you're going to have good results down the line. That's kind of the overview that I'd like to say.
And we have a couple of comments.
Yeah.
Sure. So when doing a website redesign, how much does a CMS impact website load times and by extension SEO? Is this more important than it was prior to these updates?
Okay, good, really good question. Hard to answer too. CMSs can have a very significant impact, but if you're using one of the big ones, most of the really common CMSs are taking this stuff into account and have done a pretty good job of loading quickly and providing that good user experience. Now, with that said, all of them are different. Kind of depends on what you're trying to use the CMS to do too. So we'd have to look at that on literally a case-by-case basis. But I mean, if you're talking about any of the big commercial CMSs, you can probably get there. You can almost certainly score quite well on these core web vitals and on site speed and those types of metrics, no matter what kind of CMS, or I would say no matter what major CMS you're using. When you are shopping CMSs, though, I would certainly make this part of your process. So as let's say if you got developers who are making the decision, they should be testing these metrics. They should be asking whoever the salesperson is at the CMS, whoever's trying to pitch it to you guys, you need to be asking them, okay, how have you guys reacted to this? What are you doing in terms of speed? How quickly do things respond? These absolutely need to be part of that conversation. And along those lines, if you're considering a redesign, a relaunch, this is the perfect time to take Core Web Vitals into account. Because again, this is not the kind of stuff, when you go in and you fix these Core Web Vitals, it's not like a thing that your developer just goes in there and flips a switch in the code or in the CMS even. Some of this is structural stuff. It could require very significant development, like full-on development resources, development cycles. It's not going to happen in a day. It might not happen in a week or even a month. And so if you're doing or planning a redesign, a relaunch, a redevelopment, it's the perfect time to start thinking about this stuff, making sure that it's part of the agenda, so that when that site redesign, site relaunch goes live, you are well optimized on these metrics.
So to build on that, what impact could website migration, so same design on the front end, but different CMS and slightly different page architecture through that source, what impact would this supposedly have if everything else stays the same, such as page speed, URL structure?
Yeah, good. That's a good question too. It could have an impact. So you're really going to have to use these tools to test, right? So number one thing is as the site is being rebuilt and it's sitting in its staging environment, right? It's on a hidden server. Google can't see it because you've got your robots block. You are not allowing Google to have any idea that this test website exists. Um, you need to be testing it with the tools that you have access to. So before you go ahead and take that new site live, make sure that you've already optimized against these metrics. Um, I would say site relaunches are a little bit less dangerous than they were in the past. So hopefully this might alleviate some fears too. In the old days, anytime that we started talking about a site redesign, site relaunch, even just a creative refresh, let's say same CMS, change the way it looks and feels, I would get really scared because we could see major performance declines because Google was really bad about transitioning SEO value from old site to new site. Now, in the modern era, past, let's say 2 years, it's much, much easier to do a site redesign without losing SEO value. So the big thing there is redesigns and redevelopment still get risky if you're doing rebranding, if you're changing domains, if you're significantly changing your URLs. That's where you're going to need a professional SEO to help you through that process. It's going to be really important that you do that correctly. But if you're just changing look and feel, if you're just changing CMS, you could be refreshing like your site architecture, changing some of the URLs, but you're not doing, let's say, a rebrand or a domain change. If you do the redesign and the relaunch correctly, and you're using things like 301 redirects, right, and that's the magic ticket to making sure that you retain your SEO value, you can basically retain all the value that your site had previously. And especially if you're deploying updates that make your site better optimized after it's launched, you're going to see performance improvements even. So we have seen relaunches where the site actually improves in rankings, not necessarily immediately, but let's say a week, 2 weeks out, a month out, 2 months out, especially, we can see pretty significant performance improvements from redesigns and relaunches, where in the past it was almost always going to be at least some period of decline and then a slow build back up, and then eventually taking over where the site had been before. So a redesign is not as scary a thing as it used to be. It just needs to be handled correctly, and there is a specific process for that. You can Google for all sorts of ideas about that. We can help you with that too. And we have, a very specific process for redesigns and relaunches. But if you're paying attention to SEO best practices, you're following SEO best practices, I would say you shouldn't have to worry about it. Realistically, if you're making good decisions, you're doing the right thing, you could see performance improvements rather than declines.
And then a question about content, which is something that we get asked a lot. Is there a ceiling with regards to releasing new content? Could there be a situation where you're releasing too much new content on either a monthly or daily basis?
Yeah, good. This is a good question. I want to say no. Realistically, the more the merrier. I mean, I'm always saying like bigger is better, more is better. We want to write and publish as much as we can, but keep in mind that you can end up in a situation where you're having issues because you have multiple pieces of content that are all targeting the same exact keyword phrases. And now you're telling Google, like, I don't even know where you should be directing your visitors, right? So as long as you're following SEO best practices, making sure that you're following a well laid out, well thought out, planned out keyword targeting strategy. Each piece of content is targeting a different keyword phrase. They're all working in unison, right, to demonstrate your expertise on that subject, on the greater subject, greater topic area. Then yes, you're not going to have any problem. You can be producing as much content as you want. If you're just flooding content though, and you're not doing it with SEO best practices in mind, you're not paying attention to that, you can end up with what we call keyword cannibalization, where you have multiple pieces competing for the same terms. And that's a situation that you really don't want to get into, because now you're sending mixed messages to Google. Remember, the whole point of the SEO process is information organization. Make it really clear for Google when someone types in, let's say, phrase X, I want them to go to page X on my site. When they type in page Y, I want them to go to page Y on my site. So lots of content is good. The other thing I would say is try to stagger it. So let's say that you have 30 pieces of content that are all ready to go. If you publish all 30 today, or even this week, but then you don't update anything for the next 6 months, that's not going to work as well as if you publish one piece of content on a weekly basis, until you exhausted your supply. So again, I like the process of incremental changes, regularly updating our websites, regularly releasing content. I try to stretch content out if we know that we're going to have, let's say we know something's coming up and we're not going to be able to produce a bunch of new content for a period of time, then I'm going to stretch my content out. I'd rather do, one post every 2 weeks over the next 6 months than 40 posts today and then nothing for the next 6 months. So you kind of got to think about it that way too. Try to be always releasing something new, on a relatively set schedule. That's kind of the objective.
And then last question for our session today. What specific tools do you use for testing a developed site hidden from?
Yeah, so I usually leave this up to the developers. The developers tend to have their own preferences. I think that GTmetrix is the one that most of the time when I'm talking to developers, they tend to like GTmetrix. I like Google's PageSpeed Insights because I want to look at the same data that Google has access to. But depending on how you're doing your blocks, you might not be able to use PageSpeed Insights. So kind of got to think about it. I would say let your developers do their development thing. I try not to talk too much on the development side because that's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. The important thing is not necessarily which tool they're using, but the fact that they are using a tool. And then if you don't have access to the Google tools until you launch, just make sure that you're verifying that the numbers that you're seeing in whatever third-party tool you're using look at least about the same as they look in Google's platform at launch. So this stuff, as long as it's being paid attention to and your scores don't have to be perfect. I shouldn't have, I didn't mention this earlier, but you don't need to be scoring 100% on all these, on your metrics, on your core vitals. What we suggest is aim for scores in the 80s. If you get to 75 and then it's going to take some major development initiative to get it to 82, let it be, right? Get up into the top 3/4, at least for now, while this is, not necessarily the most important ranking metric. And when everybody else hasn't already done this, if you can get into that top 3/4, you're probably going to be in a good spot. And then, like I said, have your developers be paying attention to this down the line, make those incremental updates that they can whenever they can, and then try to fully optimize when you get into the situation where you're changing CMSs, doing a redesign, doing a redevelopment, that sort of thing.
Well, thank you for everyone that's been able to spend time with us today. Obviously, you can see Tim is a wealth of information within these topics. Tim, do you want to share out your email address in case somebody wants to get in touch with you and have a bit more of discussion?
Yeah, sure. So the best way to reach me is going to be at tlavelle@theusim.com, TLAVELLE at theusim.com.
And we work with all types of clients. So usually we work with advertisers, but we do collaborate a lot with partner agencies too. So web development firms, social agencies, PR, et cetera. So we're happy to help out in any capacity. We're here to be your consultants. So feel free to get in contact with Tim. He will not be shy to give you advice and help you really chart the course for the path that you're on and really understand what your strategic objectives are. So we welcome any feedback.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Appreciate the questions too. They were great.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.